welcome to On Fire with Matt Maurer. Today we're going to talk about the international draft market. What could it bring this year, and are they accurately being reflected on the early mocks, as well as potential prospects of the NBDL, and much more. Talk to you soon. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, depending on when you are hearing me or watching me. This is Matthew Maurer with On Fire, and today we're going to talk about international draft prospects as well as some other things. But to start off, let's look at the draft history, if you will, of the past 5 years of international players that were drafted by NBA teams. It is a fact that the last 5 years, 3.5 first rounders, which you might as well say is basically 4, and 6.4 are drafted in the second round. So that means in the past 5 years of the NBA draft, 3.5 players have been drafted in the first round from overseas, and 6 have been drafted in the second round from overseas. Now, when you take a look at either My Mock Draft or NBADraft.net or Draft Express, there seems to be a shortening of that market in the second round. I think the first round is pretty well conceived by most. You have Dario Saric, you have Vasilije Micic, you have Dante Exum, Clint Capella. Those guys right now are undoubtedly first round locks, I think, to a lot of people in the know and people who are even in the know. Most people know that those guys are probably first round picks. Out of the gentlemen that are left that could possibly join that first round, Mario Hezonja is the next one. He has not yet made up his mind yet whether he's going to declare for the NBA draft. If you take a look at the second round, you have Jusuf Nurkic, you have Bogdan Bogdanovic, and you have Walter Varez. Those guys right now are second rounders. And then on the outside looking in, you have Artem Klemenko. That to me is pretty much what is being reflected by most, and that's pretty much where most people believe the international market will go. But if the history tells us anything, that means we're about 3 off in the second round, which makes me question, are there really 3 other draft-worthy international prospects? I mean, it's not a shock if you see a center get picked in the second round from overseas, because centers are in such short supply. So that makes perfect sense. However, being that the international market is what it is, I also think that some of the international market this year could get shortened, because I think the NBDL has a very, very good crop of prospects this year. The NBDL in recent years has produced solid players in the draft, and not many have moved on and done much except for Glenn Rice Jr. But if you start at the beginning, you have Mike Taylor, Latavius Williams, you have Chu Madubum, you have and Glenn Rice Jr. I apologize, that's 4. With this year's draft class, we have P.J. Harrison, who I believe will be a first-round pick. Had he stayed at North Carolina, he would have been a lock for the first round. He could possibly go in the second round, which I almost think that's probably written in stone that he'll go in the second round. After him, you have Thanasis Adekimbo, who is, everybody knows, Giannis's brother, Giannis Adekimbo from Milwaukee Bucks. And then you have Norvel Pele. And many of you may remember Norvel Pele from the recruiting years. He was one of the Lavin's prospects for St. John's. However, grades deferred him there, and then he went on to have a gypsy-like journey throughout basketball, going from prep school to prep school, trying to get himself eligible. He then decided to go to the NBDL. Very raw, but a guy that could definitely get some looks from NBA teams. If you take into all that equation, and let's say 3 of those guys get drafted, which I don't think. I think the NBDL at max will produce 2 draftees this year. You have to wonder, as the NBDL progresses, will the international market start to lose a little bit of interest? I mean, let's be honest. The international market is as error prone as there is in any market, and it kind of makes me laugh when I hear people talk about the high schoolers going pro from North America back in 2005, but yet no one raised stink when Sophocles Shortsianides and Darko Milicic, who were in a sense high school seniors, were drafted. No one batted an eyelash. No one thought anything of those gentlemen. For some reason, those gentlemen were not giving up education. They were maximizing on opportunities. Enter this year, you have Dante Exum, who is 18 years old. He comes from a North American father, and Cecil Exum, and he's turned down numerous college offers in North America to play professional ball. Now, for some reason, he will not get the press of he's abandoning opportunities, he's not mature. You're not going to get those questions with him. What you're going to get is people say, oh, yeah, he's draft worthy. Well, I'm sorry, I think most North American players that are in the top 15, top 10 are draft worthy to NBA teams. Without going into a deep discussion and in some ways digging up, erroneous facts, I think when you look at the Europeans in this year's draft, not Europeans, but overseas players, the question becomes, and I think for most NBA teams, it's this every year. Do you take a guy who can stay overseas and develop, or do you take a shot at a North American player? I think it comes down to that logic, especially in the second round. First round, you take by talent. Second round, you take sort of, just taking a shot in the dark. With that said, you have to wonder if certain NBA teams are going to start reevaluating international players. Because, I mean, if you look at the market, it has not bared the tremendous resources that people have associated it as. People can say whatever they want, but let's be honest, in 2003, when you had that huge swell of international players in the draft, you had a very thick market, and it would look like the overseas market was just bearing such fruit that after that draft, you had just year after year teams were taking fool's gold. You have to say, is it time for people to reevaluate the international market? And I think it is. I think you can't take a shot in the dark at a kid that you haven't seen, like Peter Face a couple years ago from the Seattle Seahawks Supersonics picked up. You can't take those guys anymore. Gone are the workout wonders like Malik Badian that the Houston Rockets took a couple years ago. You can't do that anymore. It's a new world. It really is, with the technology that is being integrated into scouting and as well as just that the world's global now. I don't think there are surprises like there used to be. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's guys that show up to tournaments and people are like, wow, that guy's really playing well. Giannis Antetokounmpo was another kid that, was pretty much found in a tiny gym and people were taken back. That is the exceptions. I mean, yeah, Giannis looks exceptional. He looks like he's going to be a great young player. You have your Tony Parkers. You have your Dirk Nowitzkis and Manu Ginobili's. But you have to take a look at that draft that I talked about first, 2003. At a 2003 NBA draft, guess who is the most successful overseas player in that draft, in that very fertile overseas draft? It's Leonardo Barbosa. And whether people want to admit it or not, you didn't draft those players to get a Leonardo Barbosa. There was a couple years where Boris Diaw looked like he was gonna, it looks like he was gonna do some things. Mikel Janabel, people thought, here's a great prospect. It never developed, and that's the question I have. I mean, is the overseas market as teeming with talent as people like to make it seem? I don't think it is. And I think the fact that you have at any given year 3 to 4 North American undrafted players that goes on to have a solid NBA career, and by solid I mean over 5 years in the NBA and over 250 career games. I think the North American market, being that it's let's be honest, the NBA is dominated by the North American athlete. You have to start taking a look at that, and you have to start putting dollars to cents. You're going to have to start paying attention to the statistics in this. Granted, overseas players work, but they're not the bread and butter of the NBA. And I think if you're in that second round, and it's not a guy that has tremendous size, because let's be honest, size is a premium. If you can get a 7-foot youngster, yeah, you should take him in the second round if he has everything that you want for those players. But let's be honest, very rarely does it work out. And people can talk all day about, overseas guys that have come over and that have done well, but let's be honest, they haven't done well. When you take a look at overseas players as it relates to where they've been drafted, please, people talk about the high schooler busts. Yeah, right. If you're talking about the international market, you point me to a couple guys that's as good as Amir Johnson. And Amir Johnson was the 56th pick. You show me how many overseas players at the 50 produce like Amir Johnson. Show me how many overseas players that produce like Monta Ellis. You're not gonna come away with a lot of guys. You're not. And that's my point. When you take a look at that international market, and for you guys at home, I'm not talking about North American trained players like Patty Mills, who's Australian born. He came over here to America and played at St. Mary's and for 3 years. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about guys who are playing in their native lands and then are getting drafted by NBA teams. So for you guys out there that's quickly making this list of international prospects that have done well, I'm not talking about North American trained players. I am talking about guys who stayed overseas. I mean, you look at the market. It's a crapshoot. Yeah, you can get a Peja Stojakovic, or you can get a Joe Ingles. Yeah, you can get a Boris Diaw, a solid reserve, or you can get Darko Milicic. I mean, it's really all over the place. I mean, and people love to talk about Kwame Brown as though he's the bust capital of the world. But listen, Kwame Brown compared to some of these other guys like Yi Jillian he did well. Yi Jillian is out of the league. He's back overseas. I mean, don't talk to me about, Matt, you're looking at it from the wrong perspective. No, I'm looking at it from the right perspective. If you're drafting somebody in the top 10, don't tell me you got a great return when they're not in the NBA 5 years later. Don't tell me that. And as much as Kwame Brown, people like to rip on, the man had a 14-year NBA career, okay? You're not going to see people come over here from overseas and have a 15-year career. Not usually. Say what you want. And listen, I understand Kwame Brown's not a good player, or should say, wasn't the player that people projected him to be. But all I'm saying is the guy lasted in the NBA for 14 years. He got a check, And there's a lot of guys who are from the overseas market that you never see. You hear them on draft night, and then it ends there. You won't see them again. And if they do come, it's usually 1 year in, 1 year out. I mean, why would they stay in the NBA and struggle when they can go overseas and be a star? One of the best international market drafters is the San Antonio Spurs. For the very logic behind it is they wait. They develop. An NBA team most of the time is going to take these guys and they're going to go. And that's it. Look at in 96, how many busts were there from that market? You had Martin Millsap, you had Priest Lauderdale. I mean, there were, and listen, Priest Lauderdale was North American born player, but he was at Central State, which is a Division II college, went overseas and got drafted in the first round. This guy wasn't going to get drafted in the first round playing at Central State. So it's like people put too much a premium on guys who are playing overseas. Yeah, he's playing overseas, but that doesn't mean he's better. It just amazes me that people continue to look at the international market as though it's this Garden of Eden when it's not. You have a very real chance of eating the forbidden apple with the international market. It's that simple. And you're not going to, there's so many people out there that say, oh, well, they're drafting to develop. Well, we have an NBDL now. If you're drafting to develop, put a youngster in the NBDL. Why take your chances on a guy's name? A guy who's never going to come over. Most of these kids never come over. I mean, why would they want to? First of all, you got money problems because they're getting more money to play in their native lands than they are to come into the NBA most of the time. Then it's ego. These guys were the stars where they're at. When they come over here in the NBA, they're not the star anymore. They're not. They're a role player at best and a reserve player at worst. That's their fate in most cases. I remember a couple years ago when Carlos Navarro came over here. He had an okay year with Memphis, and had like 5 points a game, and he got offers from other NBA teams. But the ego said, oh, I don't want to stay in the NBA. He actually went back over to Spain. And who could blame him? I mean, he's making more money over Spain, and he has more fame in Spain. He has more respect from the general managers in Spain. Why stay over North America, be a role player at best? And for a lot of players, I think that's the thought process, or should I say that's the understanding of the predicament they're putting themselves in when they do come over to the NBA from overseas. And listen, I'm not suggesting at all that people shouldn't take a look at the international market. Contrary to that, I'm saying look at the international market, but look at it with some reserve. Stop trying to attach hyperbole to prospects. Stop, overrating a guy just because he played overseas. Just because a guy goes overseas does not make him a different player than if he was over in North America. And unfortunately, that seems to be the logic with a lot of GMs and scouts. Oh, well, he's overseas. I like him. I remember, Jason Capona thought a couple years ago, and I forget what article it was now that I think about it, but I remember one of the lines he said in the interview was, if my name was Jason Kaponovich, I probably would be a first-round pick. And who can argue with Jason Capona? I mean, here's a guy that played 4 years at UCLA, put up really decent numbers. I think if he put up that type of game in an overseas format, he'd probably be selected in the first round. And that's the faulty logic with scouting right now in terms of the international market. And that's the thing that I'm saying stray away from. Well, that's all the time today. Really appreciate you guys listening. If you like the video, subscribe. If you hear this on Spreaker, please follow. Look forward to talking to you again next week. And that's it. Have a good one. See you.